Hello and welcome to another flying video with flight level 180. Today we are simming again, this time in X-Plane 11. We are flying the Cirrus SF-50 Vision Jet to a Lukla airport in the Himalayas. This airport is especially interesting. Lukla is considered to be one of the most dangerous 2 or 3 airports in the world and is extremely high altitude. It's actually at 9,100 feet, which makes it the airport with the highest scheduled service in the world. Now, looking around at this airplane, you can see it's a very light jet, single engine. It seats 6 passengers plus the pilot. As you can tell by the design here, it's really designed more for low speed performance than high speed performance. So it really has nice performance in the airport environment. The stall speed is very low, and it's very agile. Now, cruise speed is only 300 knots, which is pretty slow for a jet, but it's nothing to sneeze at, especially for $2.5 million. Let's go ahead and jump in the pilot and get this puppy going. So, as you look around, there's really not much to it. It's a pretty simple cockpit, and you'll see that as we fly the airplane. So the startup sequence, there's very little documentation. There's no documentation that I found in X-Plane for this airplane, but luckily it's so simple to operate that it's pretty easy to figure out. So brakes are controlled here, door is closed here. You can see some of the system status. So brakes are on, batteries are on. And it's pretty much that easy. Keep your eye on the gauges to make sure everything is a green, no hot starts or hung starts. Everything looks okay. Next thing we need to do, let's go ahead and set our lights. And let's set our altitude. Now, this is only an 80 nautical mile flight, but we have 2 things going on here. First of all, as you look around there is a massive amount of terrain up there, and you won't believe it when we get up there. So we're going to set our altitude very high. So we're going to cruise at 18,000 feet, which means we're not going to be cruising long, but the good thing that is really going to help us with is we're going to be able to make a very steep descent into the airport to avoid some of that terrain that we're going to encounter on the way. So 18,000 feet cruising. Let's go ahead and load our flight plan. Now, something I've been having a problem with in X-Plane, if somebody has suggestions on how to deal with this, I can't seem to get waypoints outside the US to load. I haven't invested in a pay package for navigation data because I typically fly mostly in the US, but it is a bit annoying. So what I did to get this to work, my AWOS doesn't work, my ATIS doesn't work, none of the radio frequencies or nav stuff works outside the US. It's annoying. So what I did is I took and downloaded a flight plan. Please, if you're flying along, follow the directions I put in the show notes for downloading that flight plan, and it's going to make your life a lot easier. So I'm going here, I'm hitting flight plan, I'm using the arrow key. You can see I have my VNKT, which is Kathmandu, to VNLK, which is Lukla. I'm going to go ahead and enter that, and there's the flight plan. Very nice. So you can see we're going to fly east and slightly south, and then we're going to turn north and fly directly up the valley to the airport, hopefully avoiding terrain as we go. So, and this is really the path you want to do. If you try to fly direct, there are some serious mountains there, and you really can't do it. You really need to fly south and then fly north into the valley. So flight plan is loaded. Let's go ahead and set our heading. I want my heading to 090. As you can see there, that's really the safest place to go. There's a 10,000 foot mountain back here. There's up to 28,000 foot mountains up here to the north. We really want to get out of here quickly and in the safest direction, and that's also the direction we want to go. Autopilot we're going to leave alone for the moment. We're going to use it heavily so we don't have to think too much and can talk as we're flying. And let's go ahead and set the flaps. Flaps 1. Okay, we are ready to go. Let's check our fuel. And you notice there I have my fuel at about half tank, so I'll tell you the reason why in a few seconds. So let's go ahead and spool up to about 50% and 1. Everything is in the green. Let's go ahead and go. X-Plane airplanes tend to be a little squirrely in the ground environment, so you want to be very light with your control forces. So I'm trying to go very lightly here. I'm going to rotate around 80-85 knots. go. Let's go ahead and bring our nose up.
PCAP alert.
And we have a positive rate. Let's bring our gear up. We're going to start coming right to a heading of 090. You notice it's a nice agile airplane in this environment. It really does a nice job. And I'm going to pitch for a little bit over 100 knots. Now that I'm 100 knots, I'm going to go ahead and bring my flaps up. And you notice here that my flaps are indicating up and our speed is picking up nicely. Let's go ahead and turn on autopilot so we can start talking. So I'm going to hit autopilot on. I'm going to hit FLC for my altitude control, and I'll talk about that in a second. I'm going to hit nav, and we're so close to the GPS course, we should be okay. So our FLC mode is set for 130 knots. That's too high. So let's get our nose up, and I'm going to set it for about 105 knots. So what that means is the airplane is going to pitch for 105 knots. So if we're going too fast, it's going to pitch up. If we're going too slowly, it's going to pitch down. So it is an incredibly nice feature to have on an autopilot. We've acquired the GPS course, everything is looking good. Now, first of all, one of the reasons the FLC mode is so great is because you're never going to stall out the airplane. If you use V-speed and you set your V-speed for 2,000 feet per minute or whatever, as you get up in altitude, you might actually stall out as the airplane pitches to try to maintain that vertical speed. But if you're in FLC mode, I know I can go all the way up to my max altitude of 28,000 feet and still maintain 105 knots of indicated airspeed. It's never going to stall out. So it's a very safe way to climb. And you notice that we're climbing at 2,100 feet. Given how light we are, you can see we have half fuel, and we have essentially no passengers. It's not that wonderful. This is not exactly a rocket ship, but it does reasonably well. So not bad. I wouldn't scoff if anybody tried to give me this airplane. So let's check our settings. So we have flaps up, we have gear up and indicating, everything is good. So let's go ahead and continue our climb. There you go. You can see that this is incredibly mountainous terrain. It is. You are a great pilot if you fly in this stuff every day, because with any weather it really gets difficult. So let's talk about fuel load. I loaded half a tank of fuel. That's more than enough range for what we have. I sort of wonder how the pilots handle flying this route. Do they actually go pretty light on fuel? My suspicion is that they do, because the risk of running out of fuel is probably a lot lower than the risk of actually flying into this runway environment and overrunning the runway and dying that way. You really want your stall speed as low as possible. You want your rollout on landing to be as short as possible, and you're really going to see that when we actually start looking at photos of what is in our future here. So I try to keep it as light as I thought it was reasonable to actually make this safe landing. So let's go ahead and take a peek at what is in our future, just to get calibrated here. So I'm going to bring up the chart. So this is one of the better charts I found. I didn't find any great charts, but this one gives you a sense of what we're doing. So we're flying in from the west to this fluffy intersection, which is the initial approach fix. Then we're making a sharp turn to the north to a 002 heading, and then we're flying directly up the valley. And you notice there's a lot of really high terrain as we fly up this valley. Then we're going to fly over this ridge here and we're going to make a sharp turn to the right and fly into the runway at 062. So what are the things you notice about this chart? Well, first of all, a lot of high terrain. That's a given. Second, the bailout point of where you basically make a go no-go decision is before you make your turn into the runway. When we're leaving the final approach fix and we decide, oh, there's too much weather and we can't see the airfield, or it's whatever's wrong, the point at which you bail out is actually when you're on your northern course. So you fly up the canyon, make a canyon turn, and come back out the valley the same way. Now the next thing you notice, there's no back course on this runway. There's a 062 heading into the runway, and you can't get into it from the back, and I'll show you that on the chart in a photo. So here's actually a real photo of somebody flying into this runway, And the X-plane runway actually does a pretty good job of replicating what you see here. First of all, what's the first thing you notice? Well, there's massive mountains behind this runway and to the right and pretty much to the left. Once you get near this threshold here, you're almost committed. It's going to be extremely difficult to actually try to make the landing, fail, and try to go around. There's not a lot of options there. You're going to find yourself face planting into a hill. Second thing I notice here, this runway is very short. It is 1,729 feet. That's not a lot of runway to work with. Third, if you look at the end of the runway, if you run off the runway a little bit, you're going to have an encounter with a rock wall there. There is dirt and rocks right there at the very end of the runway. So you can't go long, so you really got to make sure you're stopped. Fourth thing I notice, and this is a little more subtle, but look how steep his approach is. He's not coming in at a standard 3% gradient. He's coming in a much more steeply. And the actual recommended descent percentage or gradient is 3.8% for this airport. So you are coming in really steeply, and it makes it harder to manage your speed, and you're landing on this little tiny runway. Now the last thing you should notice is that the runway is sloped away towards you. So you're actually landing uphill, which actually is going to help you a lot in slowing down. And the gradient of the runway is 11.7%. And I said 3%. It's 3 degrees. 3.8 degrees is your descent path, and then the runway is 11% up angle. So what are the things working for you? Well, you have 11.7% up angle on the runway that's going to help you stop. What are the things that are working against you? Well, you have a extremely short runway. You're at high altitude, so your ground speed is going to be much higher. And there is really no way to go around once you get down towards the threshold. So put that all together and you've got an extremely dangerous environment to land in here. So let's go ahead and jump back into the airplane. So we have reached our cruising altitude of 18,000. Our speed is coming up. Let's bring our power back a little bit. And now that we're up here, you can look around. I mean, there is some serious terrain here and seriously high terrain. So you've got to be really cautious as you're flying through this environment. When I did my flight earlier today, there was clouds down here and pretty far from the airport. It was obvious that there's no way you would want to ever make this flight with any sort of IFR conditions, any sort of IMC whatsoever. If it's not VMC, you're really taking your life in your own hands. Speed is coming up nicely, getting up near our cruising speed of around 290 knots. There's no wind, so we don't have to worry about that with the weather settings I have set. Let's talk strategy here. So when we get to this airport, we're going to be coming in very steeply to try to stay away from the train. Well, and there's a pretty big load in terms of what the situation you're going into. You're going into very high terrain, probably with high winds, and going into a very short runway. So you want to make things as simple as you possibly can when you're in your descent, so you have a clear head to focus on the things that really matter, which is avoiding the hills and monitoring your airplane systems. So let's see what options we have here. Well, let's click procedure, and let's see if there's an approach we can use. None. I'm pretty sure there's no approaches for this airport. So let's see if there is a standard arrival. And is there anything there? No, there's not. No arrivals. So basically, you're making a VFR approach into this super difficult airport. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have some tools that can help us. We actually know that we want to be descending into the runway at 3.8 degrees. Well, I think we should just go ahead and descend at 3.8 degrees all the way from our cruising altitude. That way we don't have to be monkeying with anything. Basically, we're going to be coming in right at the gradient we're going to need to land with. So we can simulate a glide slope by using VNAV. And this is something I really love about X-Plane 11 is that it has VNAV in the standard X-Plane 1000 or the Garmin 1000, while FSX does not. It's really nice. So to go ahead and do those settings, let me show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and jump in here, and I'm going to scroll down to VNLK, and we know the airport altitude is 9,100 feet. So let's route our finger here by scrolling up to 9,100. And I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and it goes ahead and enters provisional altitudes here of what it expects us to be, what altitudes it expects us to be at as we cross the various waypoints, which is great. We're not going to monkey with this. We could go and modify these and make these, you know, say, okay, I like 12,450. I can make that a fixed altitude, or I have a crossing restriction or whatever. But that's not necessary. The second thing we can do is, you notice here our flight path attitude is 2.5%, which is, I think, is the standard descent rate that you get in X-plane. Well, I want to take and change that to 3.8 degrees. Not percent, degrees. I keep on saying, I apologize for saying percent. I want to change it to 3.8 degrees. So what you do is, there's a shortcut here. You can scroll down using this, but you can just hit VNAV profile, and it jumps you down there. And notice as I scroll this, my time to top of descent is actually changing because I'm decreasing, or increasing my angle of descent. So now I'm set there. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. So now I know my top of descent is 7 minutes away. Now, you would think that you could just go ahead and hit VNAV right now, and it would actually capture the VNAV profile when I'm 7 minutes, in 7.5 minutes, but that actually is not going to work. One of the tricks you need to know is the VNAV is only active in acquisition mode for a maximum of 5 minutes. So if I hit it now, 2 minutes short of the top of my descent, it will turn off and deactivate. So we aren't going to actually start that now. Now, I strongly recommend, and my thanks go out to Philipp Ringler, who is one of the developers on X-plane. He did some fantastic videos that explain how to work with VNAV and how to work the navigation systems in X-plane. And they're really high quality videos, probably the best content I've seen explaining anything for X-plane, and I strongly recommend, if you're going to fly in X-plane, to go and watch those videos. I'm going to put the link to at least one of the videos in the notes, and I strongly recommend you go and watch those. And he has a great video where he talks about the VNAV, and he talks about things like there's a lot of complexity to it. Like, you'll see this sometimes in small letters, it'll sometimes have an underbar, it'll sometimes have a bar above it, and such forth. And I might do a video to actually go through all those details at some point. But for today, we're going to keep things simple and just set our restriction at 9,100 feet. So 6 minutes to go. So let's talk strategy. So as you can see, we're flying into a lot of heavy terrain. We're going to make a very steep descent. Because we're descending so steeply, that means we have to be very cautious with our speed. We want to make sure that we want to keep our speed, get our speed down as quickly as possible, and end up in a stable situation. And I forgot to turn off my landing lights. Let's turn those off. We want to make sure we're in a stable speed situation, pretty far out from the runway, so we don't have to worry about that once we get down near the runway. The last thing you want to be doing is slam dunking your speed down when you actually get close to this runway. I want to be close to my actual approach speeds, as pretty far out. And just to give you a sense of the speeds, there's, again, not a lot of documentation out there, but just doing a little research, I found that the stall speed at your max landing weight is 67 knots. We're obviously going to be lower than that, but we can use that as sort of a reference point. Our VREF is, at our full weight, is 83 knots. I calculated out to be about 77 knots at our current weight. Our landing distance is 1,628 feet, and given the runway is 1,729 feet, it's going to be a challenge to actually get stopped in time. Our takeoff distance is 2,036 feet, which is longer than runway. It makes it very tough to take off this runway. Maybe we'll try that at the end to see how that works, just for fun. It actually is possible, but it's a challenge. Our gear speed is 210 knots or below. Our flaps 1 speed is 190 knots, and our flaps 2 is 150 knots. Okay. Let's take a peek here and see how close we're getting. So now we're 4 minutes out. So we're actually in range to actually turn on our VNAV. So the way to do that, you don't just click VNAV. The first thing you want to do, if you look at this window, our altitude is set for 18,000 feet. Our VNAV altitude, our first restriction, is set for 9,100. Well, if we just hit VNAV now and we hit the top of descent, it's not going to start descending because our altitude is 18,000 feet. We'll never go below that. But if we go and take and scroll this down and set it to 9,100, now we can actually use VNAV. So I'm going to go ahead and click this button and watch right here. Now VPath is on and it's in white, so that means we're in VPath acquisition mode. And when we actually hit the top of descent, the airplane will automatically start descending down. Now, something I was wondering about, I was just thinking about this as I was making this approach earlier today. Do we need to, since it's such a high altitude airport, what do we need to worry about? What is that going to change? Well, is it going to change our stall speed? Well, when we look at our stall speed, this is our indicated airspeed. So this is what the airplane actually sees. This is what it sees in speed through the air. So if our stall speed is 67 knots, we're going to see 67 knots here. That's really our target. So our stall speed doesn't change in terms of what the airplane sees. Now, what is going to change is, since we're so high, we are going to have a very high, we're going to have a much higher ground speed. So that's just another thing working against this. So we're going to be, VRAF around 77, and our actual ground speed is going to be, 90 knots. So in order to not overstress the airplane's tires and landing gear, we really want to be aggressively down at that VRAF speed, and maybe even a tiny touch below to make sure we're in good shape. So when we actually touch the ground, because I'm not sure what the maximum taxi speed in this airplane, but my bet is it's approaching 100 knots. So just some things to keep in mind. So here we are. Let's zoom in a little bit. Ground speed is 309 knots. Let's see. This is not cooperating for me. There we go. Let's look at our flight plan. Okay, we're 1 minute and a half from the top of descent. And we have 3.8 degree gradient, which is correct. Everything is looking good. Now we're starting to make our turn to the north. Let's see what that looks like. So we're making our turn to the north. And it's just really impressive how this autopilot works, and how the, it does, this is not a, it's not an arc approach, but this autopilot actually does follow arc approaches. So if you can find one, Watsonville Airport in California has one. It's pretty fun to go and fly those, and it does fly those correctly. It's pretty cool. Let's go ahead and click our terrain. Zoom out a little bit just to give you a sense. There's a lot of high terrain. There's a lot over 18,000 feet. So we're 21 seconds to go. You can see we're 600 feet below the glide path that we're going to take, and our speed feet per minute number is increasing. So in any second now, in 7 seconds actually, we're going to actually start pitching down. So watch this. I'm not touching anything. VPath is still white. There we go. VPath just went green. There we go. We're Alt-S mode, so we're selecting for 9,100 feet. Now you notice my speed is going to go zooming up when the airplane starts descending, so we got to keep our eyes on that, make sure we don't overspeed. And airplane is starting to come down. You can see the little caret there, so that gives us almost like an ILS glide path to show us where we are, and we're actually going to use that. We can use that almost like an ILS vertical indicator to show us where we want to be on our approach. And it's funny, it's beautiful. The graphics are really beautiful in X-Plane, especially after spending a lot of time in FSX. But it's funny. Where's the snow? There'd be a lot of snow up there, I think. A lot of glaciers up there on those mountains, because those are 20,000 foot plus mountains. Okay, let's see how we're doing here. We are 17 nautical miles from the airport. I think we need to start bringing our speed down, so let's just really start slowing things down. And we're going to hit this point and slide in that way, and we're going to head right into the valley. I'm going to get set up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to probably switch over into, and there's our airport right there. That's where we're going. And you can can see there's a lot of terrain between us and there, but we should be able to navigate it okay this steeply. Speed is coming down nicely. We have a 210 knot maximum gear extension speed. We're right on our vertical path. If you look here, we're only 3 feet off, which is about as well as you'll ever see it do. Airplane is starting to turn in. Let's go ahead and get our speed down a lot. So we are now 13 nautical miles from the airport. There we go, looking good. So I'm going to go ahead and slide our heading a little bit to the right. I really want to be about there. And let's go ahead and go into heading mode. And the reason why is I don't want to run into this guy right here. So let's try to come here. We're going to come up this left side of the valley and slide right into the runway. And when I did this earlier today, I had to wave off right here because this entire valley in the real world conditions was absolutely socked under. 200 knots. Probably start bringing our gear down. Our distance from the airport is 10 nautical miles. Let's leave it a couple seconds. And one thing I want to make sure I do is I want to turn off the yaw damper so I have rudder authority. Very important. Okay, speed is coming down. Let's go ahead and drop our gear. We're 9 nautical miles out, and let's go ahead and get a notch of flaps. First notch is 190 knots, so speed checks. Let's go ahead and drop those flaps. Flaps are coming down. We have 3 green. We have everything set up. That's going to bring our speed down a lot. So what I'm going to do is I want to go ahead and, so we're almost to flaps 2. Okay, flaps 2, we're in range. Let's hit that. Keep our eyes on this to make sure it sets correctly. That looks good. I'm going to go ahead and set my N1 to about 75%. And that is going to keep me exactly where I want to be in terms of slowing down, decelerating into this environment. So let's go ahead and turn off the autopilot, turn off the flight director, turn off the yaw damper. And you notice here that we are a little bit above the V path if you look right here on the indicator. So we want to get our nose down because we do not want to be high coming into this airport. There we go. That's about perfect. We're 100 knots, and that's, you know, I would probably be flying in a lot faster in this airplane on a normal approach, but given the terrain, you know, there's just, I don't think there's a lot of sense in actually going in there too aggressively. Okay, we're getting a little low. Now, when I actually get close to the, when I get onto the final, I'm going to want to really be a little bit underneath the glide path, so I'm actually touching down very early on the runway. Okay, our speed is coming down a little much. We're 86 knots. Ground speed is 100 knots. And let's go ahead and give it a little more power. Let's bring it up to about 80%. I'm trimming like crazy here. It's funny, in X-Plane the trim is much more sensitive. It's less sensitive and more subtle, and our speed really needs to be a little higher. But you really have to hold that button down to get trimmed correctly. Well, in FSX it really trims quickly. So we are a little bit high here. Just watching this needle right there. I'm keeping an eye on my airspeed. And you know, you're thinking, I'm sure you're thinking 86 knots, really slow. Well, you know, I don't think that's necessarily such a bad thing. I'm going to bring my seat level up a little bit here. Let's take a peek at the runway. There it is, right there. We're still too high. Let's get our power down a little bit and get our nose down. Still a little too high. Really like that 75% number when you're getting in this close. You really want to be right about 75%, and that should keep you pretty close to your VREF speed, which we said was around 77 knots. So we're still a little fast. It's still a little bit high, so we need to bring our power down. Just to give you a sense, there's our runway. Let's go ahead and start arcing in there. So basically right here, if you can't see the runway, you need to go around. You need to go up that canyon to make the canyon turn. There we go. Bring our speed down. Okay, gas, undercarriage is indicating 3 green, mixture and props are irrelevant, flaps are full and indicating full, and our switches, let's go ahead and turn on our landing lights, and our yaw damper is off. So we are in good shape. Pretty close to our VREF, which is where we want to be. Get our speed up a little bit. I really want to touch down early on this runway, so I want to get my nose down. And power all the way down. Small flare. And full brakes. Let's see if we can get this puppy stopped. And there it is. So really not too difficult, even though the airport is not slanted up. The runway is not slanted up. It's pretty easy to land this airplane there if you get your nose down and you keep your speed under control. So just for fun, it's nice. They did a nice job on this environment because they knew people are going to fly to this runway, and that's probably pretty typical right there. That airplane of what flies in here. You actually aren't. I believe I read that you aren't actually allowed to fly into this airport unless you have special permission, and you are. There's tons of restrictions, like you've done 10 practice flights with an instructor and such forth. It is a really difficult airport to get permissions to actually fly into, and probably none of us are ever going to do it in real life, and I don't know if I would really want to, but maybe I'm just too risk averse. Okay, so let's go ahead just for fun. That's the video, but let's try this. We're going to see if we can actually get this airplane to take off, and this is given the runway is flat, it's not very easy to do. So I'm going to go ahead and lift my flaps completely, and that's just so I can get full acceleration. I find that if you leave your flaps down, and we want to take off with full flaps, but if you leave them down, it's very hard to get enough speed built up. So let's go ahead, and we're going to do a Navy takeoff here. So we're going to go full power with brakes on. Okay, there's full power. Off we go. And as we get close to the end of the runway, we're actually going to drop the flaps, and once they're fully down, we're going to go ahead and try to lift off and stay in ground effect. So flaps coming down. Okay, right about here we need to rotate and keep it in ground effect, and we're off the ground. So that's how you land and take off from Lukla in the SF Vision Jet. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any other ideas for videos, and thanks for flying with Flight Level 180.